All right, welcome back, everybody. Last time we went over the basics of telltales, how to use them, the difference between windward and leeward telltales for jib trim, and then slotting the main to follow suit. So now we're going to go into the difference between upper versus lower jib telltales, which really give us an indication of the sail twist on the jib. So we have our jib. We've got our port and starboard telltales, our upper and lower. And the goal, so we have four telltales. The goal is to have all four flowing straight back. That indicates the flow is nice and attached and smooth. But what if the bottom two are straight, but one or both upper telltales are dancing? Well, that tells us that the mast rake is improperly set from a combination of jib tension and mast tep. Both of those things affect mast rake on 420s and FJs. So just in case you aren't familiar with what mast rake is, let me just draw that real fast. So we have our hull, we have our mast, and the mast rake is this angle basically between the hull and the mast, or alternatively, you could parameterize it by this angle here. But it's how tilted the mast is relative to the hull deck. And then mast step, where the mast connects into the hull, there's a couple different positions. So this is inside of the hull where the mast meets the hull. And there's a couple of different bolts in here. And the mast slots into one of them, and you can adjust that. And this is the step position that you're set at. So what can we do? I mean, if we're racing in college, we likely can't adjust these things in between rotations or on the water. But if we know our boat is incorrectly tuned or set up, do we have anything at our disposal to fix that in the short term? Well, luckily on FJs, we can adjust jib leads, and not as luckily on 420s, we can play around with cross sheeting the jib. And both of these things help us fix the twist in our jib such that both the upper and lower telltales are flowing back simultaneously. And an extension of that, they break at the same time, or they start to luff at the same time as we start pinching. So first we'll talk about jib leads. This is the better case. It's nicer to have jib leads. Of course, when you're sailing FJs, the consolation to that is you don't have jib cleats, which can be kind of a pain in the butt. But we'll stay positive here. So first, when we're talking with jib leads and adjusting them, we start with them positioned in the center of the track. So, where the jib sheet goes through the pulley, that's on a track. And there's a couple different settings on which this pulley can be set. There's the jib sheet. Here's the track. So we start with it in the middle. And then, and we point, of course, we point and trim everything close hauled. And then what we do is we slowly begin to pinch into the wind. While watching both the upper and lower jib telltales very carefully and seeing what they do, watching their behavior. And that's the windward jib telltales. So we're going to notice one of three cases. The first case is ideal, which both of them begin to dance at the same time. Both of them break at the same time, the upper and the lower. Less ideal, and more often is the case, we have these two unideal cases. Case one is if the upper telltale breaks first. Well, then we move the jib lead forward until the upper and lower telltales break evenly, or they start dancing at the same time. So you can check each position, moving it forward in the boat until this happens. Now, the converse to that is when the lower telltales, or windward telltale, breaks first, we move the jib leads aft. And we're moving both jib leads. So once we find the position of one, we can also set the other. We're assuming the boat is nice and symmetric between its port and starboard side. And then we're going to do that until it breaks even. Now, if we're in heavy winds, after we find this point, and when I say heavy, I mean about greater than 13 knots of steady breeze, we want to move our jib leads aft about 2 inches from the break-even point. And that'll give us a nice balance between pointing and boat speed or power, basically, in our sail, if it's super heavy. So that's using our jib leads to adjust the twist of the jib based on feedback from the upper and lower telltales. Now we're going to look at cross sheeting. And this is certainly a less scientific case. But on 420s, which a lot of the clubs have that we race with, there obviously are no jib leads. So we don't have that luxury of adjustment. So sometimes you can cross sheet and get away with it, basically. So cross sheeting is basically a similar, though more difficult to implement result can be achieved. It's not as good. And sometimes it doesn't even work. But it's good to talk about. And this is for 420s. So what do I mean by cross sheet? I'll draw our boat here. We've got our jib and our mainsail. And the wind's coming something like this. So we have our leeward jib sheet, which connects to the leeward side of the boat. And that's, the one we use to adjust the jib normally. And then we almost always, or most people who aren't using this technique, have the windward sheet nice and loose. And the windward sheet is obviously the other side. Windward sheet And so this technique basically uses the tension in the windward sheet along with, the usual tension in the leeward sheet to achieve different sail twist in the jib to make both the upper and lower telltales agree with each other, if that's possible. So steps on how to do this. You go close hauled and trim the leeward sheet in as normal. So just as we'd be normally sailing upwind. 2 is the same as before. We gently ease our boat into the wind and watch our telltales luff. And then I wish I could give you a black and white rule like I did with the jib leads, but there's really no such thing here. It depends on all the tuning of your boat and if it's possible to do so. But things that you can try are putting tension onto the windward sheet and cleat, then slowly ease off the leeward sheet, the normal sheet that we use to trim our jib in, and then watch, similarly as before, about what point or setting of easing off the leeward sheet do our upper and lower telltales break evenly, because that's what we want. Now, I will say, do not ease the leeward sheet out more than an inch. Because we don't want to risk our pointing. So you can kind of play around with that, putting more windward sheet on, less leeward sheet on, but don't do anything more than an inch because that closes off the slot between the jib and the mainsail. And then we get a lot of turbulent flow and unideal pressure differentials that lose a lot of lift and propulsion and forward propulsion in the boat. All right, but telltales aside, we should always cross sheet the jib a smidge, unless we're super overpowered, basically to close off the jib's leech for a better pocket to give us more speed. So telltales aside, always cross sheet. And when I say a smidge, that should be probably like maybe half an inch of additional tension on top of the just regular tension of the windward sheet. And that's unless we are overpowered. And that kind of agrees with the jib lead case where we want to bring our jib lead back if we're overpowered in heavy winds, and it has a similar effect of not cross sheeting, essentially. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, oh, actually, before that, I'd like a last remark on jib trim. Last remark. So I want to say that boat speed problems in our upwinds in 420s and FJs when you're racing are typically associated with poor jib trim and shape. And then everything that we just talked about above should alleviate that, or at least give you the tools to address them. All right, the last topic in this video I want to talk about are streamers, which are what I call telltales on the shrouds. So I'm going to draw our boat going downwind this time. Little foreshadowing. We're wing on wing, and then we have our streamers flowing downwind. Now, in general, the skipper should be looking at jib telltales on upwinds and offsets. And the windward shroud streamers on downwinds. And the windward one specifically, because here, we have our windward side and our leeward side. And if we look directly, we know that the mainsail basically covers the leeward shroud when we're sailing downwind. So this leeward streamer is practically useless, not only because we can't see it, but also because it's completely blocked from the flow of the wind by the mainsail. So we're looking at this windward streamer. And what do we do with it? Well, we use it to detect and confirm the effects of puffs or shifts or shifts. And then we can adjust our boat heading accordingly. Because 9 out of 10 times when we're racing in college, these boats, we typically want to be dead downwind, wing on wing, if we're sailing a fair course with nice windward heel. So that brings up a quick note about where we want to place our windward, or basically our streamers in general. And because we want significant windward heel in most conditions while sailing downwind, we want to make sure that our streamers are placed up high enough such that our skippers' bodies don't block the wind flow to them, and high enough such that we can see them and they get enough flow while our boat is tipped down towards the water level. And they're still achieving a good representation of what the wind's actually doing. Things aren't interrupting that. But with that, I will see you guys in the next video.